My name is Jason Zemansky. I am on Jeff Meacham's team, large cap biopharma team. Kicking off our third day here, very pleased to introduce Joseph Pruitt, President and CEO of Achillion Pharmaceuticals, who will take us through his Factor D program. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. Good morning. I will be making some forward-looking statements today, and please refer to our 10K and 10Q filings for an outline of all the risks. So let me start off with an overview of Achillion and where we are today. So we're currently focused in the complement system in the Factor D inhibitors. Factor D inhibitors are specific to the alternative pathway. Our first indications that we've targeted for development are PNH and C3G, PNH being a hematology disorder and C3G being a nephrology disorder. But these are just the first indications that we will be pursuing with our alternative pathway inhibitors. And we'll talk a little bit about how we're thinking about broadening out our development plans. So at first we've achieved a proof of concept in 2018 with our PNH monotherapy, as well as our add-on study with C5 inhibitor. We were also able to demonstrate a proof of mechanism in our C3G trials, and I'll be sharing the data from both of those studies here today. We've also advanced our next generation inhibitors, ACH5228 and ACH5548, into the clinic, and we'll be sharing some of the data from those programs as well. We ended 2018 with $270 million in cash, and so we're well funded to achieve all the milestones that we'll discuss here today. So just briefly, the complement system and why we're targeting this area. The complement system is part of the immune system. There are three pathways in the complement system. Our specific focus is in the alternative pathway, and the indications and the areas that we're focused on today are hematology and nephrology, and that's some of the data that we'll share later. But we also have a strong interest in looking at ophthalmology, neurology, and gastroenterology. And the reasons that we're interested in these areas is there's been a fair amount of work that's been done that links the alternative pathways to diseases that affect these areas. Now, as a small company, Achillion, we won't be pursuing all these indications on our own. These are indications where we would probably reach out and look for collaborators or partners as we think about how to approach these areas. So Factor D, as you can see, sits in the alternative pathway. It's upstream from C5, and the idea there is by targeting the amplification loop in alternative pathway, we're able to inhibit the alternative pathway and therefore any diseases that are specifically linked to alternative pathway. C3G and PNH, which were the first two indications that we've targeted in the clinic, have been clearly linked to alternative pathway, and I'll show you the data that will show you the demonstration of that. So why Factor D? Well, we've been able to create a small molecule with oral bioavailability that presents an opportunity for broad tissue distribution. Factor D is a rate-limiting enzyme with a relatively low circulating plasma concentration, which makes it a good drug target. And selective inhibition, especially as we think about broader indications, we believe will provide significant advantages over C3 and C5 with its effects on infection risk. So just a quick update on where we are with ACH4471, which is our first generation Factor D inhibitor that is currently in the clinic. So the treatment experience to date, we've dosed over 200 healthy volunteers. We've done multiple DDI and ADME support studies. we've completed the renal impairment and hepatic impairment studies, and the long-term tox in both 6 and 9 months is also completed. We've also initiated the 2-year carcinogenicity studies, and those are ongoing, and we've completed the development and reproductive tox studies. So based on this package, we believe that ACH-4471 is well positioned now to move into phase 3 and registrational trials later this year. Our safety experience in summary with the program is we've dosed a little bit over 35 C3G and PNH patients. Cumulative, we have about 10 years of patient dosing. A couple of our early PNH patients who are on the extension studies are now closing in on 2 years of dosing. We've experienced only one SAE, and that was in the PNH monotherapy study, and that patient resolved on drug on a taper. 8 of the 10 patients from our monotherapy study have converted to our extension study and still remain on therapy. And recently, in our C3G program, we presented the data to FDA and were able to gain alignment on expanding the treatment inclusion criteria to adolescent patients, so patients that are 12 years and above. So in the specific studies, what we've been able to achieve and why we believe that we've demonstrated proof of concept, first in the PNH study, we were able to see that patients on monotherapy had increases in hemoglobin. The reticulocyte counts were lowered. They were able to achieve fewer transfusions, improve FACIT and fatigue scores, and significant reductions in LDH. On the C3G side, the early data is supportive that all the C3G biomarkers that we monitor in trials had responses, and that includes C3, BB, and C3 fragment. And we also had initial observations and reductions in proteinuria. Currently, there's 25 trial sites that are active in the C3G program, and we continue to expand that trial as we close in on completing the phase 2 program. So here's a quick snapshot of our pipeline. On the C3G program, we have 2 trials. We have a 12-month open-label trial as well as a 6-month trial that is placebo-controlled. The primary endpoint for both of these trials is biopsy. We will be completing the enrollment in these trials in the near future here, and we will be taking that information forward to FDA later this year. In the PNH program, we also have 2 phase 2 programs. We have the PNH monotherapy program, which we completed the enrollment and shared the data last year. That trial remains open as the patients have converted onto extension, and we are wrapping up our eculizumab add-on study, and we'll be presenting that data in mid-2019. Again, both of these programs are completing their phase 2 clinical trials, and both sets of indications we will be taking into FDA in preparation of our phase 3 initiations. On our second-generation programs, ACH-5228, we have initiated the multiple ascending dose trials that we recently announced, and that program is on track and dosing with plans to take the data into FDA for an IND later in 2019. So why PNH and why Factor D in PNH? And the issue is that C5 does a very nice job of stopping cell lysis by interrupting the process of intravascular hemolysis. But what's left is that the cells still exist and they end up getting coated with C3 fragments. And this ends up leading to cell lysis and decreases in hemoglobin. So by interrupting that process, we believe there's an opportunity to improve outcomes for patients. So if you actually look at the data and what's happening in this market, you'll see that approximately 75% of patients still remain anemic while they remain on C5, and up to a third remain severely anemic and still require transfusions. So here's the initial proof of concept data from our monotherapy study that we shared last year. So the first is that you can look at these biomarkers of LDH, and you can see that patients have an immediate response, and they remain very stable over the long term while being dosed with 4471. And in the right-hand column, you'll see that the patient's hemoglobins do improve while on Factor D inhibitor. In addition, we saw pretty significant increases in FACIT and fatigue scores, as well as normalization of reticulocytes. So in summary, for the monotherapy trial, we thought that this demonstrated proof of concept, and we decided that it would be best to take this population and transition it to our second-generation inhibitors, in particular ACH 5228, because of its half-life will allow for a decreased dosing regimen, as well as its potency, which will potentially lead to better outcomes for patients as well. Achillion's plan is to convert the patients from our extension trial to the monotherapy PNH 5228 program in early 2020. In addition to our monotherapy trial, we also have an eculizumab add-on study. These are patients that are on stable doses of eculizumab that are still requiring transfusion. And what we've seen to date with an early read on 4 patients were that all 4 patients' hemoglobins did improve. We also saw that in spite of being on C5, there were also improvements in LDH, with many of the patients moving into the normal range. We also demonstrated improvements in FACIT and fatigue scores, and importantly, reticulocyte counts moved into the normal range. We believe that this warranted continued dosing from our interim data, so we're completing and wrapping up the enrollment in this trial. We will announce the completion of this enrollment shortly, and we anticipate presenting this data at an upcoming PNH conference in May. I'm going to move on to C3G. And C3G is a rare disease, affects approximately 10,000 people globally, with 4,000 in the United States. C3G its base cause is an overactivation of the alternative pathway that leads to C3 deposits in the kidney, and over time a reduction in kidney function. Our objective is to interrupt this alternative pathway overactivation and reduce the C3 fragment deposition into the kidney. So we initiated a 14-day study to look at the biomarker response in C3G patients, and what we were happy to achieve was that in all cases, all biomarkers were moving in the right direction. So as you can see, we were looking at C3, BB, the urinary biomarkers, and also proteinuria. So this 14-day study gave us the confidence to move into broader and longer phase 2 programs, both our 6-month and 12-month studies. So we currently have 2 studies going on. One is the 6, one is the 12-month study, with over 25 sites activated. And we plan on wrapping up this enrollment very shortly, and we'll be taking this data to FDA later this year to align on a phase 3 protocol design and endpoints. So again, through February, we had enrolled 15 patients. The objective of enrollment for these two phase 2 trials is 20 patients. We should be wrapping this up, and we will announce completion of enrollment sometime at the end of March to early April. For our next generation programs, 5228 and 5548, we were able to demonstrate in single ascending dose that these inhibitors did in effect have significantly better potency and half-life. For our drug 5228 that's currently in the multiple ascending dose trials, we saw potency that was 3 to 4 times higher. We project that this will be at a minimum BID, as the half-life is approximately 12 hours, and that's with just initial formulations. And as I mentioned, the phase 1 study initiated in January and is proceeding as planned. So the upcoming catalysts for Achillion are outlined here on the slide. We've already initiated the 5228 multiple ascending dose study. We plan on completing the enrollment for the C3G trial here in the next month, and that'll be 20 patients. The PNH combination study is wrapping up its enrollment with the data to be presented at an upcoming conference. We will announce the completion of the enrollment in both the C3G and the PNH trials when that occurs. Our second half plans include filing an IND for ACH 5228. It also includes taking the 6 and 12-month data into the regulators to align on a phase 3 protocol design and endpoints. And then we will also be taking our PNH combination data and monotherapy data into FDA later this year, also to align on a phase 3 program design. In early 2020, you can expect the conversion of the first generation monotherapy patients onto our second generation drug 5228. That should happen in the first quarter. And we will also be initiating our phase 3 program in C3G. And we will also take our next generation factor D inhibitor 5548 and move that into multiple ascending dose. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.